Hello and welcome to our weekly share on the Parsha. It's been a break, and not only that, hello again on Torah Anytime. As you may know, I transferred my sharing from Torah Anytime. I was looking for new platforms, new ways of doing this. However, this presented a lot of difficulties for some of my regular viewers, and much gnashing of teeth, rending of garments, and wearing of ashcloth. Ashcloth? Ash and something like that. Sackcloth, that's the word, yeah. So, in order that everybody should be happy, um, we're back and we are ready to start a new season, I suppose. And I thought it would be interesting to do a double this week and next week on the theme of Yosef in Mitzrayim, or one of the elements of Yosef in Mitzrayim. But we're going to go, we'll set this up in the first year. It will cover Yosef becoming the viceroy of Mitzrayim, his relationship with Pharaoh, and then we'll delve really very deep in the second year. So I hope that will satisfy everybody. So you will still be able to see me on my YouTube channel. I'll advertise it on my Facebook page. I'll be back to normal. I'm trying to change the setup to make it more professional, to have maybe a musical introduction with a board explaining exactly what that week's share is all about. Better graphics. So I just need somebody who's wise and clever and young who can help me do all that. So watch out for new things on this channel. Let's start as we normally do by wishing or hoping and davening for Refuah Shlema and dedicating the shir for Refuah Shlema for Rafael Chai ben Sora, for Oria Chaim ben Chani Yehudis, Rachel Levana Bas Shirley, and Chaim Mordechai Dov ben Esther. They should all have a Refuah Shlema. Okay, so to begin the shir, let me explain why this happened and why I'm uh, uh, focusing on this particular idea of Yosef and Pharaoh. So there's an element of that story and that relationship which is profoundly puzzling. And I teach in two yeshivas in New York. I was sitting at the parent-teacher evening, which is one of the joys and highlights of my entire existence. The annual event at the yeshiva of here called Yeshiva of Far Rockaway, which is a very fine yeshiva, by the way. And there is another rabbi who sits opposite me, or in the next table to me, I should say, Arya Yitzchok Berman. Very fine, and I really only see him once a year. And when we're between parents coming along to talk to us about the enormous achievements of their children under our guidance, then we get a chance to schmooze. And sometimes he comes across, and it's remarkable. He is the Yiddish phrase a geschmacki Yid. He's a very, very fine person. And not only that, whenever we're talking to Rabbonim, etc., and whenever we're talking, we just have to sort of like start the sentence and we know what the other one's saying. Don't be sure. Al Tamid Ba'atzmacha, he just said to me when we were discussing a point. The Mishnah goes on to say, don't be sure of yourself to the day of your death. But he didn't have to finish it. He just Al Tamid Ba'atzmacha. And of course, I knew what he was talking about. And that opened up my mind to an issue which I put to him because I think in that exchange and all of our conversations, which are just headlines, and we know what the whole story is, and then we can move on very quickly. It was my suggestion to answering a problem I had with Pharaoh. You see, the Gemara says, and we'll be learning the Gemara in just a second, that Pharaoh could speak 70 languages. It was a demand, a requirement to become the king of Egypt that you speak 70 languages, which was effectively all the languages of the world at the time. And Pharaoh could do that. The problem was there's a 71st language. And the 71st language is Lashon HaKodesh, the Holy Tongue, Hebrew. And he couldn't get that one. Now, this, as I said to Robert Berman, this is strange in the extreme. I mean, if somebody can conquer 70 languages, why not Hebrew? Lashon HaKodesh, Hebrew, I once heard from the well-known anti-Semitic broadcasting uh, organization called the BBC, their Jerusalem correspondent, non-Jewish fellow, who was saying that in moving to Israel, he was able to conquer the language very quickly in a couple of months. He said it's an easy language. And indeed, he's right. Compared to English, which is basically a crazy language, it is a very easy language to learn. It has logic, it has rules, it has structure. The letters, all the words have three-letter roots. I mean, it's whereas, as we all know, English is just bonkers. The same letters pronounced differently, thought through, O-U-G-H, thought through, thorough. Um, huh? Somebody learning it for the first time is going to be absolutely baffled because it doesn't have any rules, and the occasional rule that it does have, it seems to violate all the time. That's a hard language to learn. But Hebrew isn't. Not only that, if he spoke the 70 languages of the time, he spoke languages which are very close to Hebrew. So I remember once when I was living in Gateshead, one of my neighbors who had become the world expert in Jewish grammar. He's called Rabbi Yitzchok, or David Yitzchoki. And I was across in his house once, and there was a Jewish book there that I'd never seen before. And I opened it, and it looked like the standard, it was called the Mikros Gedolos, the Chumash, with all the major commentaries on the page, but some of these commentators I'd never seen before. And there was a Targum. Targum is the Aramaic word for a translation of the text, the Chumash. And he said, read that and translate it for me. Always up to our challenge. Of course, reading and translating Aramaic is not as easy for us as it is to do it, to read and translate Hebrew. But anyway, as I say in English, I made a good fist of it. It was quite successful. And after about 2 minutes reading and translating, he said, do you know what you're reading? And I said, Aramaic? He said, no, Arabic. Arabic. It was Arabic using Hebrew characters. And I was translating about half of it and getting stuck in about half, perhaps. Can't remember exactly the details. This was a long time ago. But Arabic is very close to Hebrew. So many words are identical. Ummah, meaning a nation, in both Arabic and in Hebrew. Salam, shalom, salam, almost identical. Kafir, the Arabic word for a non-believer. Kafira, in Hebrew, is somebody who doesn't believe or non-belief. And many, many, many more. So, what was his difficulty? To learn that other language, and we'll see they had great difficulty with that, and that's really the theme of the share we're going to tonight's share and next week's share, which of course spans very nicely the part of the Torah we're learning about Yosef's journey into Egypt. Um, what was the difficulty? Why was it such a problem for him? Obviously, a brilliant man. Why couldn't he get Hebrew? Well, my suggestion was because, rather like Rabbi Berman and I, maybe it's because when they're speaking Lashon HaKodesh as opposed to modern Ivrit, then indeed it was only headlines, and it was a reference to a Gemara, a reference to some famous commentator, and they would know what they're talking about, but nobody else would. I quite like that idea. He didn't like that one, and his idea was maybe because it's the holy language, the holy tongue, and Pharaoh was very far from being a holy person, so maybe that's why he couldn't conquer it. I struggled with that as an answer. After all, it says in Pirkei Avos, 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and 10 generations from Noah to Avram, and as it says in Pirkei Avos, all those generations are really horrible, horrible people. Culminating, of course, in the Tower of Babel. Um, and the Tower of Babel, when they actually attempt to fight with God and conquer God, it sounds a bit weird. I think I've covered that in the past, but anyway, if not, we can do that. So they weren't very nice people, but they spoke Lashon HaKodesh. There, if you look at that story, you'll find it in Parshas Noach. There it says that the whole people were Sofa Achas. They spoke one language. And the gematria of Sofa Achas is Lashon HaKodesh. That was, as the Talmud makes clear, the one language that everybody spoke, the entire world spoke at the time. After the attempted coup d'etat against Hashem, uh, again, just a headline, very deep stuff. Then Hashem changes their languages, or changes their language, which was Hebrew, and turns it, as it were, into 70 different languages. Tiny elements still to be found in almost all the ancient languages of Hebrew. And of course, as I said before, the ones closest to it are the ones less distance from it, like Arabic, which I discovered that actually I could translate lots of. Aramaic, certainly, very similar to Hebrew, and many other Semitic languages, and then further afield. So, what's Pharaoh's difficulty? Why does he find this such a difficult idea? So, let's go to the source of this whole story, which is the Talmud, and the Talmud is in Masechtas Saita, and it's Lamed Vov Omid Beis. I'm going to read a little bit to you. This is just to, I'll read it just to introduce you to it, and then I'll go over a little bit because I want it to be Sherlock Holmes's. Work on the assumption that the wording of the Talmud is exact, precise, and accurate. If you've never studied Talmud before, it doesn't matter. Just make that your assumption. That the person writing knew exactly what he was writing. Therefore, if there seems to be something wrong with the writing, we will question that. So you're basically becoming a Torah detective or a Talmud detective. So here's the story. Omar Reb Chia bar Abba. So a rabbi called Reb Chia bar Abba says, Omar Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, B'shasha Omar Loi Paraliyah. So at the moment, and you'll find this in Bereshit Mem, chapter Mem Aleph, 41. When Pharaoh said to Yosef, lo yuram ish es yada, against you, no one raised their hand. In other words, you are the second in command of Egypt. Nobody can raise their hands. At that point, Omra et stagnini Pharaoh, the itstagninius is the Aramaic word for, well, they use translate this as the people, the astrologers, the people who looked into the future, but they could. We've certainly covered that in the past in our share, that the astrology and the ability to look into the future did exist, indeed, could still exist, and they had mastered that. These were the people who were the bishops, the cardinals of Avodah Zarah, of idolatry of that time, but very brilliant people. And they challenged this new idea. Paris simply been advised by Yosef what to do to avoid the forthcoming prophesied famine. And he was so impressed by Yosef, he said, well, you're going to be in second in command. The Edstagnidi, who are also the lords, the dukes of Egyptian society, protest. A slave who has been purchased for a mere 20 silver coins. Apparently, that's not a lot in those days for a slave. Tamshilenu Aleinu. You're going to appoint him to have command over us. Now, as the commentators point out, part of the laws of Egypt were that no slave would ever be able to have kingship and rule over any Egyptian. And Pharaoh knows that. So he counters and says, yeah, he's not a slave. Oh, I know he was sold as a slave, but a slave is somebody who is the son of a slave, is the son of a slave, is the son of a slave. It's a category of human being in the ancient world, but he's not. Oh, yeah, he was sold as a slave, but he doesn't come from slaves. I smell in him, I see in him royalty. I think he comes from a royal household. I feel he's royal, innately royal, which he was as a son of Yaakov. So he said to them, there's a place. Yes. So he says to them, I see shades of royalty in this man. Omrloi, they said, okay, we need a test. Let's prove that. Imkain, well, one of the other rules of Egypt is that no king can be appointed. So that we can, okay, so it's going to be appointed to be sort of like a king or viceroy. Okay, You say that he's royal and not a slave. Okay, that will answer our problem. But if he's really royal and royal enough to be royal over us, then he has to be able to speak 70 languages. Pharaoh concedes that and says, and if that's the case, fine, let's do that. Give me Yudea B'Shiva Maloshin. So let's see if he can do that. I'm on him. Good Malchus any Roya. Amrloi Im Kain. Let's see if he speaks 70 languages. And Pharaoh says, okay, tomorrow we'll see. We will test him. Then there's a very strange thing that said he didn't speak 70 languages. And along came the Malach Gabriel. And the Malach Gabriel taught him the 70 languages. It wouldn't go in. So he took, how about this? He took the hay from Hashem's name and added it to Yosef's name. You'll find this in Tehillim. And Tehillim, and it's, if I remember right, and I can't see the smallest of the print here, is going to be Pei Aleph. And Posuk Yudzayin, when Yosef is spelled Yehosef, a hay is added. And with that, he's able to master the 70 languages. And indeed, that's what happens the next day. So he teaches them, and then the next day, what happens is L'machar kol lishna deishtali para ba'hadei astrale. So Pharaoh spoke to him in, let's say, Aramaic, and he replied in Aramaic. And then he spoke to him in Arabic, and he replied in Arabic. And then he spoke to him in, I don't know, Persian, and he replied in Persian. Farsi. But when Yosef spoke Loshen HaKodesh, Lo habe kol yoda my habe omer. Pharaoh didn't know what he was saying. Didn't know what he was saying. All Malay Igmari. How about this? He said to Yosef, teach me that language. Igmari v'lo gamar. He taught it to him, but it just wouldn't go in, which is where we started this story. He couldn't get this. Omerle ishtaboyali de lo megali. Swear an oath to me that you'll not let people know that I don't know, because if I don't know a language, then I'm going to be kicked off the throne. And he makes an oath, and Yosef makes an oath. That's all we're going to look at. That's this Gemara. But do you hear what happened here? The next day, and of course, Pharaoh is putting him to the test, and all obviously his dukes and lords and all the royalty of his household are gathering watching this. And one language after the other he speaks. Paris, but the language, remember, as I said to you, you've got to bear in mind that everything is written exactly. Pharaoh speaks exactly to him in one language, and he answers correctly in the same language. Then he speaks in another language, and he answers. But then, after he's done all that, it says, then Yosef spoke in Hebrew, and Pharaoh didn't know what he was saying. Now, you see how there's an asymmetry going on here, something wrong. The whole order, how we've learned this, what happened was Pharaoh spoke to him in a language, and he answered in the language. But then it says, and then Yosef spoke to him, and he didn't know what he was saying. The whole idea is you wait for the king to speak to you, and then you answer him. But Yosef spoke to him without the king speaking to him, and he didn't know what he was saying. So I do not think, and I spent 2 weeks researching this a little bit. I do not think that Pharaoh did not know how to speak Hebrew. It's not credible that somebody who could master 70 languages, and the languages, as I said, many of them are very, very close to Hebrew, could not get Hebrew. So what does it mean? And if it says Yosef spoke to him in Hebrew and he couldn't get it, and the whole structure is Pharaoh does the speaking and you answer him in the language he's speaking to you. So if he spoke to him in Hebrew, it didn't say he didn't speak Hebrew. It said he didn't know what Yosef had said. So maybe you could say it like I said it, because the way he spoke Hebrew wasn't a very abrupt, way that two rabbis could speak to each other. And that sort of could explain it. But certainly, if Yosef speaks in Hebrew, he's been spoken to in Hebrew by the man who's his interlocutor, who is the man who's speaking to him. And that's Pharaoh. So he could speak Hebrew. If that's the case, what does it mean he didn't know what Yosef was talking about? Now our question changes. And I haven't seen this, but I I would argue that the implication of the Talmud is very, very clear that, of course, Pharaoh spoke Hebrew. I mean, it's not a difficult language. Um, when Bill Clinton spoke at the funeral, President Bill Clinton spoke at the funeral of Yitzhak Rabin, he famously said, Shalom, Chaber. That was the wrong accent, but anyway. Shalom, Chaber. Southern accent. Um, Anybody can learn that. So what's the difficulty? And that is where we're going to be going now. Um, of course, I've got to tell you an Alshach because I'm addicted to the Alshach. But if you look at this interaction in Pashas Miketz, so what happens is V'yom para el Yosef ani para biladecho lo yoram ish es yodai. That was our pasuk. So that is in Parshas Miketz, chapter 41, and it's verse Mem Dalad. V'yom para el Yosef, and Pharaoh said to Yosef, just as we read it in the Gemara a second ago, ani para biladecho lo yorim ish es yodai. Nobody will be able to raise a hand against you. There's raglov bekol oretz Mitzrayim, and you will, as it were, have control of the whole of Egypt. But Yikra Paro Shem Yosef Tzofnas Paneach, and he calls him Tzofnas Paneach. Now we're not going to go into what that name means, but what he says to him, Ve'ezragle Bekola Oretz Mitzrayim, V'yikra Paro I can say Tzofnas Paneach, V'yitano es Asnas Bas Potifar, and he gives him a wife. But also, he says here, and I've lost where this is. But Yom Paral Yosef, where is it? Where is this pasuk? Atati al Basi, you will be out on my household. Val Picho Yishak kol Ami, Rak Bekisi Agadla Mimcho. That was the one. This is pasuk Mem. You will be over my household. You'll control the palace. Va'al Picho Yishak kol Ami. And according to your words, your instructions, my people will be sustained. You'll make, as Unclos translate this, they'll be fed through you. You'll decide how the food's distributed. Rak hakisi agadla mincha. Only the throne I will be greater than you. But the Alsha translates that as Rak hakisi agadla mincha. The throne, my superiority, my ultimate rulership of the country, I get from you. First of all, you avoided the fact that there's a famine. Second of all, if they knew that I didn't speak that language, I would be deposed. And you, by keeping that secret, you're giving me the throne. So I couldn't resist telling you that Alshach, but we're stuck with the question: how is it that he didn't understand Yosef, especially if he speaks Hebrew? So here is the Morale of Prague. And the Morale of Prague answers this and says the following thing. He says, Al titoma lama lo yapara b'lashon. Do not be astonished at the fact that Pharaoh did not understand Lashon HaKodesh. They didn't understand what Yosef was saying. But again, even here, he's not saying he didn't speak it. He didn't understand it. Now, and there's a difference, as we will soon see. He knew 70 other languages. So that's exactly my question. And he just frames it to the Morale of Prague himself and says, The answer is because at that time, Egypt dominated all of the societies in the world. 70 languages, 70 nations, the Torah, the biblical classic 70 nations of the world, the 70 languages of the world, because the domination of Egypt meant that they had to be able to control all these people. And Egypt was able to control all these people. And that's why he knew 70 Lashonas, 70 languages. However, the Holy Tongue, in Mesiachas loy klal, that had no connection to him at all. In Mesiachas had no connection to him at all. לפיכך לא לומד פרעה לושן הקודש מיוסף או ממי שהוא, כי אין הלושן רוי לוי. He was unable and capable of getting it so he would understand Yosef, not to speak it, but to get it to understand it. I'll throw in a word that's not which is sort of appropriate. The sophistication of Yosef to be able to understand what he was saying. Because ultimately, the Egyptians were never meant to have control over the Jews. And remember, when the Jewish people, of course, have to go into exile, it didn't have to be Egypt. It was Egypt. They were able to control us for 210 years, but not have complete control and not eternal control. Whereas the other nations of the world, and potentially Egypt, could control them forever. What Egypt stood for, its philosophy, its theology, that could last forever, but not over the Jewish people. Interesting. That's a little bit like my answer, and perhaps also my friend the Rabbi Berman's answer as well. Okay, let's go a little bit further. There is an astonishing Rashi, which you'll find if you look at chapter 2 of Genesis and look at verse Zayin. And here it's talking about the creation of a human being. And it says that Vayetza Hashem Elohim, and Hashem created Esa Odom Ha'ofer Min Ha'adama. Hashem created humanity dust from the earth, famous story. Vayichav Ba'apai, and he blew into his nostrils Nishmas Chaim, a living soul, a living neshama. Vayhi Ha'odom L'nefesh Chaya, and so that he was a living creature. Now, the Onkelos, the commentary of Onkelos Hager, on the side, he says, what does it mean that he v'haba ba'odam l'ruach mimalalo, a nefesh chaya, a living soul into him? That one, it refers to a ruach mimalalo, the ability to speak. The thing that made and distinguished human beings from any other creature that he made is that human beings are linguistic, are linguists. They're able to speak. Animals can communicate with sounds, but don't have words, don't create words for new concepts as their understanding, I think it's the world of science, grows. That's uniquely a human thing. What language is it talking about? What language did Adam Harishan speak? Lashon HaKodesh. And Rashi says an astonishing thing here. Uncle says that this posuk refers to that what makes a human being is that they can speak. But he says, Dea B'dibur. He quotes Onkelos and adds another word, knowledge, thinking, that a human being is a sentient, thinking creature and can speak. Lashon HaKodesh. What makes us unique is we speak Lashon HaKodesh. And at the beginning, as I mentioned before, all the nations of the world spoke the exact same language. After the destruction of the Tower of Babel, there are now 70 languages. But there's another language, the original one. And it was not lost from Abraham's family and from Abraham's near circle and his Talmudim. They still spoke Lashon HaKodesh. They still spoke Hebrew. So says the Kuzari. In fact, that, he says, is why it's called Ha'ivri, because he spoke that original language, which he learned from his grandfather, Aber, the son of Shem. So now we've got a question, which is a different question and very intriguing. Why did Lashon HaKodesh stay with Avram Avinu, but with nobody else? So I'll give you just a little tantalizing piece till we come back to this next week. This is from a Zohar. And the Zohar says the following thing. When God changed their languages, or changed their language to become many languages, that meant they would no longer be able to achieve what they were attempting to achieve. A coup d'etat against God. You probably know that Bezalel was selected to build the Mishkan, which would become eventually the furniture therein would become the furniture of the Beis Hamikdash. And how did he do that? He did it because he knew how to rearrange the letters of the Hebrew alphabet to create the furniture and the structure, which was first called the Mishkan and eventually would be called the Beis Hamikdash. That was made, it was uh, forged, if that's the right word, fabricated through, created through miraculous manipulation of the letters that created the whole of the universe. And when the Tower of Babel, one of the deepest and most profound stories of all, when they attempted to overthrow God, God says, Hashem says, I've got to stop them. If I don't stop them, nothing will be withheld from them. There is a way in which they could change Hashem's plan. Hashem's plan was constructed through Lashon HaKodesh, through the Holy Tongue. It came first. God wrote the Torah first, and then created the world. Astonishing things. And then they would be able to use that blueprint, to use their knowledge of that language to change things around so that the Jewish people would not be created. Avram Avinu at that time never had any children, could never have any children, would make sure it didn't. They would be able to torpedo and spoil, destroy what Hashem had in mind. So let me read a bit more of this Zohar to you. Since God changed their language, because to be able to manipulate and change the structure of Shemaim created through Lashon HaKodesh, you have to know Lashon HaKodesh. Imagine somebody wants to introduce a virus into a computer system. You have to know how to access, you have to know how to program, to be a hacker, to undo what the programming is. But now that they're no longer able to use Lashon HaKodesh, and that doesn't mean they can't speak it, like Pharaoh, but to get to what it is, then at that point, their plan is completely torpedoed and their plan of sabotage has been sabotaged. Now, this is already taking us into deep territory. So we'll come back to that deep territory next week. I hope I've whetted your appetite. And next week we should be able to see properly exactly why Lashon HaKodesh stayed with one people who would grow into the Jewish people, and what it really means to be able to master Lashon HaKodesh, something that defeated even the brilliant linguist called Pharaoh. See you next week in Torah Anytime and in my usual YouTube channel and elsewhere. I wish you a great week.